Welcome to County Connection, where we talk about events, programs, and services offered by Summit County Government. I'm your host, Julie Suter. We have a great show lined up for this May episode. We're going to be talking about the avalanches that took place this past winter, how to recycle those tough-to-recycle materials that are hanging out in your house, and we're going to talk about how to be prepared for flood season. Thanks for joining us. For our first segment of this May episode, we're going to be talking about some of the avalanche activity that took place during this past winter in 2019, and specifically the implications at Tenmile Canyon. And here to tell us all about it are Ethan Green from the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. Welcome, Ethan.
Thank you.
And Brian Lorch, our Director of Open Space and Trails here at Summit County. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, so we had kind of a crazy winter in 2018, 2019. Ethan, from your perspective, how would you characterize this past winter?
Well, a crazy winter is a pretty good characterization. There's really a lot of different kind of distinct cycles from an avalanche perspective, and then culminating in the first couple weeks of March, where we really had a historic avalanche cycle with events, ranging from, kind of the 50 to 100 year return rate and some that are probably much longer than that. And we're still trying to figure out exactly what the return rate is on those really big events.
And how do you go about doing that?
Well, we've already spent a lot of time kind of scouring our database and other historical records, but we know pretty quickly, if you look at like the sky chutes across from Copper Mountain, that there's nothing in those records that are events that big. So then we start looking at the trees and actually taking cross sections and counting tree rings and dating how many different events we've had and how old those trees are that got destroyed.
Interesting. So
yeah,
you're out there.
Summer project.
Okay, cool. And then specifically, can you tell us what happened in Tenmile Canyon and how to put that in perspective?
Well, Tenmile Canyon was a little bit of its own flavor, and so I think it's something we're still sort of thinking about, and there's a lot of things that happened during the event that help us sort of put it in perspective, but it was such an unusual event, it's sometimes a little hard to characterize. There's a long history of avalanche activity in Tenmile Canyon, especially when the train was running through there. The train ran along where the bike path is today.
Okay.
And you can see historic pictures of avalanche cycles that happened in there and people dealing with that. And in the records, there's descriptions of some of these big events. There's a really big event in the 20s in that area. Since the interstate got put in, they put it on the other side of the creek partly to protect it from avalanches.
All right.
There haven't been that many avalanches that have actually hit the interstate. The last time before this first week in March was 1983. And then since then, we've had a few events, I think 3, where there's been powder cloud avalanches, where the clouds have rolled over the interstate, but not solid debris. Then we get to this week in March, where we had 3 avalanches put solid debris on the road, and probably more like 20 that put powder clouds on the road.
And then can you tell us a little bit about how your department works with CDOT in regard to kind of that interface between avalanches and our state highways?
Sure. So CDOT runs the avalanche safety program for all the state and federal highways, and we work with them on that. We do all the forecasting. So we collect snow data and the weather data, and we monitor the avalanche conditions, and we make recommendations to them about what the hazard is to different sections of highway. And then we make recommendations about when they should be doing active mitigation work. And they're responsible for doing that work, but we assist them in doing it, mostly record keeping and talking to them about the location and timing of some of these different missions. So for Tenmile Canyon this year, we were in the canyon for many days in a row, monitoring what was happening and talking to CDOT managers who were trying to deal with that whole Interstate 70 section, really from DeBeck down to Golden, and manage everything that was happening in there, with avalanches being just one of many issues that they had to deal with.
Okay, great. And so the folks on your team spend a lot of time in Tenmile Canyon or keeping an eye on it. And then that dovetails pretty nicely with the more recent kind of formalized relationship with Summit County in regard to our rec path.
Yeah, absolutely. For the few years ago, Brian asked us if we could help with some of the challenges that they were having dealing with Tenmile Canyon in the spring, mostly. And so we entered into an agreement. We've been sort of assisting them in a similar way that we do to the Department of Transportation, really monitoring the conditions in there and making some recommendations about what the hazard is, so that they can use that information to decide how they're going to work in there and work on opening the bike path and allowing public in there.
Okay, great. So Brian, as we tape this today, we are sitting at the very beginning of May, and tell us a little bit about what is the status of the rec path system in Summit County as a whole.
Sure. So we have everything but the 10-mile Recpath is open now. It's all been plowed and then swept. There are still sections that may have gravel on them, so we ask people to be careful because runoff from snow melt can often bring the gravel in, and or we're still getting snowstorms, so
Sure.
we can get more gravel put down. So that's one thing to be concerned about. But again, the whole system is open with the exception of the 10-mile Recpath.
And so in a year that is not crazy, or at least just more typical, what timing are we typically looking at in regard to opening 10-mile Canyon?
So usually around the end of April, we have the CAIC folks going up there and checking out the paths and looking and letting us know when they feel it might be safe to allow our machinery to get in there and clean out the rest of the path. In general, it tends to be mid-May before we get that okay and everything's okay. I think it was mid-May last year. This year, because we've got all this additional debris and all that, it's going to be significantly longer before we're going to be under there.
Right. And so, Ethan, some people may think, well, gosh, since we had these huge slides coming down and so many of them in March, that maybe there isn't as much snow up there for spring slides to happen. But what's the reality in terms of the level of risk in 10-mile Canyon right now on the rec path?
Well, in spring conditions, we see a lot of fluctuations in the avalanche hazard. And so, like today, the hazard actually might not be that great, but it can change really quickly.
Okay.
And we do have a lot of snow at high elevation in 10-mile Canyon. It's about 3,000 feet from the bike path to the start zones. And so even though it may feel like summer on the bike path, up in those start zones, it could be quite different. And that's a lot of what we're doing is monitoring those conditions to see how the hazard is rising and falling.
Okay. And so, so Brian, once you get information about current conditions from the folks at CAIC, how then do you communicate the level of danger to members of the public?
So generally, it's, I think, probably a little bit unique in terms of what CIC does. We're asking for when is it safe to open this and keep it open from then on is really what we're asking them to do, which is not an easy thing to do in avalanche predictions, but that's our goal, is to, once we open that thing, we're going to have people and baby strollers and all of that underneath there, so we don't want it to have chances of being high after that. Right. So it tends to be keep it closed until we're pretty clear that the starting zones have lost enough snow and the areas between the starting zones have melted out so that we're not likely to have future avalanches.
So how much debris is out there right now from these avalanches that have happened so far?
We walked it, and it's pretty astounding how much there is. There are, as he mentioned, over 20 paths that crossed and brought some trees with them. Some of those are in the range of 50 feet, but a lot of them are closer to 500 feet wide, and several of them are bigger than 20 feet deep. So we're talking just massive amounts of snow and debris and rock, mainly trees, that we're going to be removing from the bike path.
Right, so big, heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who isn't really familiar with an avalanche debris pile, because if you think, oh, snow, like, well, that's not a big deal, right? But tell us a little bit about what's in an avalanche debris path and what are some of the physics behind it.
Well, so the avalanches that we had in 10 Mile Canyon, they're contain a lot of mass, and they're running down a huge portion of the mountainside, about 3,000 feet. And so they could be going, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour pretty easily. And then they decelerate really fast as they hit the valley bottom, and all that snow compresses, and you end up with this really dense pile of snow. It's, like you said, it's not like the snow we're used to seeing falling out of the sky or shoveling out of our driveways or hopefully skiing on the hillside. It is much closer to cement. It's really dense, it's really hard. And then it's been sitting there for a month now, and it could be sitting there for a little bit longer. And so it continues to get harder. And so it's much closer to ice, really, than we think about with snow. And then in addition, these slides, like Brian was saying, it's not just this really hard snow, it's rocks, it's trees, in some cases quite large trees. Mm-hmm. And so it really is a mixed pile of debris. It's rocks and trees all frozen together in this really hard mass, and it's really difficult to clear. I mean, even with heavy machinery, you're dealing with so much weight, and it's so hard that you're kind of chiseling it out and having a hard time picking it up because it's just so heavy and full of dirt, debris, trees, rocks, all of that.
All right. So given the scale of what we have going on out there, what are the next steps?
So one of the things that has become clear is that our Road and Bridge Department doesn't have the resources to take this on without pushing off some of the priority projects that they already have online. So we are looking at putting out a request for proposals to get contractors. We anticipate doing that in the next couple of weeks, actually putting out the request to get some contractors who are capable of doing this work. Of course, one of our big concerns is finding someone who won't damage the Rec Path in the process, so we don't want to put steel-tracked machinery on there, which is what they would first choose to do, because again, this is heavy stuff, and so it's going to be someone that can come with the equipment we need to do the project. Our hopes is that it will be a few to several weeks that it will take them to do that, so we're looking at hopefully having the Rec Path open by the end of June, but we're not making any real promises because we have not, in the past we've had 1 or 2 avalanches in my 20 years here hit the Rec Path, and here we've got 20. And they were all mostly snow, and this is mostly trees and debris. So we're in a whole different realm of what we usually have in order to open this Rec Path this year.
Right. And then this isn't the only section of our Rec Path system that has been impacted by these avalanches in 10 Mile Canyon. So we've also been working on a project to expand the system just south of Copper. And so tell us a little bit about what's going on in regard to that.
Yeah, so the Fremont Rec Path, the section that we're working on right now to take the new Rec Path from Copper up to the gates of Climax, that project is a little over 3 miles, and it will rejoin Highway 91 and right where the wider shoulders are on where it becomes 3 lanes, so it'll get through that whole narrow section of the canyon. There were several paths that came down across that. In fact, the biggest one that really hit Highway 91 crossed all the way across the area that we plan on putting that in and took out several power poles in the process. And so XL contacted us and asked if they can underground the power lines using our alignment that we're planning on building on before we build the path. And so we worked with Federal Highways, which most of this project is being built under Federal Highway grant. We have about 4.75 million that they're putting towards this, and they're doing the engineering and construction oversight on the project. So they decided to push it off until this fall for doing their putting it out for bids and then actually building it next year. So it effectively pushed us back a year of what we hoped, but is really more on what our original time frame was for that project.
Okay. So a little bit of a wait, but
Yeah.
in the big picture.
Yeah.
We're excited to have all of that help from Federal Highways.
Yes, definitely.
All right. And so lastly, where can people go to stay up to date on new information as it becomes available, as we're able to kind of figure out and dial in more of the details on the conditions in 10 Mile Canyon and the status of the Recpath in particular?
So,
Well, we're putting out recreational forecasts, so forecasts for all of the Colorado mountains for another month,
Okay.
all the way through May. So you can go to COLORADO.GOV/avalanche and get the current avalanche forecast for the northern or central mountains.
Great.
We'll be doing specific forecasts for Summit County later in the month, but we just give those to Brian and his crew so that they can make decisions off of that.
Awesome.
and then as far as the Recpath, we'll be keeping updates on our website for what we're doing. I imagine we'll try to keep some good footage of us trying to clear it and all that as it goes on, and keep that on the county website so people are aware of what's happening.
All right. Well, Brian, best of luck to you and your team in this monumental project. And Ethan, thanks so much for all your help that you give us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but stick with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to get rid of those hard to recycle items in an environmentally responsible way.